On a freezing January morning in 2022, a Boston police officer was found unconscious in the snow. By the time the sun came up, he was dead. His name was John O'Keefe, 16 years on the force, raising his late sister's 2 kids after losing both his sister and her husband within a year. By every account, a good man, the kind of guy who showed up. And on January 29th, 2022, he was supposed to come home. He never did. What happened next turned a small Massachusetts town inside out. 2 trials, a hung jury, national headlines, and questions that, honestly, still don't have clean answers. This is the case of John O'Keefe and Karen Read. And before we get into it, I need you to know something. We're going to talk about theories, multiple theories, because that's what this case demands. Nobody watching this video gets to be the jury. The actual jury already spoke. Our job is to understand what they were looking at. Let's start with what we know. The town is Canton, Massachusetts, population around 24,000. The kind of place where cops grow up with cops, where the families on the force have been there for generations. That detail matters. You'll see why. The night of January 28th started simple enough. John and his girlfriend Karen Read went out drinking. They ended up at a bar called the Waterfall Bar and Grill. A group of friends was there. Brian Albert, a Boston cop, his brother, a few others, and a man named Brian Higgins, an ATF agent. Higgins is going to come up a lot. Hold on to that name. After the bar, the group decided to keep the night going. The plan was an after party at Brian Albert's house at 34 Fairview Road. Karen drove John there. Now, here's where the 2 sides of this story split. The prosecution says John got out of the car, Karen put it in reverse, she hit him, she drove off. The defense says John walked into that house alive. Something happened inside. He was put back outside in the snow, and Karen got framed for it. At 6:03 the next morning, John was found unresponsive on the front lawn of 34 Fairview. Karen was there. She had come back looking for him. By all accounts, she was hysterical. Witnesses say she screamed, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." Other witnesses say she was just panicking. Both can be true. John was pronounced dead at the hospital at 7:59 that morning. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma to the head, hypothermia. He'd been outside for hours. Karen Read was charged with second-degree murder. The lead investigator was a Massachusetts state trooper named Michael Proctor. And this is where things get complicated, because Proctor was eventually fired from state police. Why? Text messages came out during the first trial. Texts where he called Karen, quote, a whack job. Texts where he joked about her medical conditions. Texts that made it really hard to argue this was an unbiased investigation. Proctor was relieved of duty, then fired. That alone would be enough to make most people raise an eyebrow. But the defense says it goes deeper than one bad cop. They say it's a cover-up. And the man at the center of their alternative theory is Brian Higgins, the ATF agent. Now, before I go further, I want to be very, very clear about something. Brian Higgins has never been charged with anything related to John's death. He has consistently denied any wrongdoing, under oath, on the stand, for hours. Everything I'm about to walk through is the defense's theory and the questions they raised. It is not a finding of fact. It's not a conviction. It's a theory. With that said, here's why the defense pointed at him. In the weeks before John died, Karen and Brian Higgins had been exchanging text messages, flirty ones. Karen texted him, "You're hot." Higgins replied, asking if she was serious. She said she was. They talked about her relationship with John deteriorating. Higgins testified that at one point, leaving John's house, Karen kissed him. Not in a friendly way, romantic, he said. He admitted he was attracted to her. On the stand, Higgins said this, quote, "I'm not proud of these text messages, but I take responsibility at the same time. John was a friend." Now, was this a motive? The defense argued it could be. Higgins says no. He says he was just trying to figure out what Karen wanted from him. Both can be true. The night of the party, surveillance video from the waterfall caught a moment. Higgins gestured across the room toward John. Another man grabbed his arm. Was that nothing? Was it tension? Karen later told reporters she didn't notice anything between them. Some witnesses also said they didn't see a fight. Take it for what it is. After the party, things got strange. At 2:22 in the morning, phone records show Higgins and Brian Albert exchanged 2 phone calls. Higgins on the stand? He couldn't remember those calls. Said it might have been a butt dial. 5 minutes later at 2:27, somebody at the house Googled, quote, "How long to die in cold." That search was done by Jennifer McCabe, Brian Albert's sister-in-law. She says she didn't actually search until later that morning after they found John. The phone data is disputed. Then there's the Canton Police Department thing. After the party, Higgins drove himself to the police station. between roughly 1 and 4 in the morning to do administrative work. He testified the weather was bad and he wanted to help move some cars. The defense found this odd. A drunk drive to a police station in the middle of the night after a party? Then there's the phone. Higgins had an iPhone 11. After John's death, that phone got destroyed. Higgins testified he disposed of it on a military installation. He said he asked another ATF agent, a friend with computer forensics expertise, to help extract certain text messages first, just the messages with Karen. Then he handed those over to investigators. The defense's argument? If you're an innocent witness, you turn over the whole phone. You don't pick what they get to see. Higgins' response, he says he was trying to be helpful. He says nobody from law enforcement asked to inspect his vehicle, but he would have shown it to them. He says he hired an attorney early because, well, he was a federal agent in a high-profile case, and anyone in his position would do the same thing. A lot of legal experts will tell you that's true. Lawyering up early isn't evidence of guilt. It's evidence of having a lawyer's number, but the optics are what they are. This brings us to a former FBI special agent named Michael Easter. Easter was hired by the defense for $7,500 to write a report on the investigation. He spent more than 20 years at the Bureau. The judge in the second trial did not allow him to testify, so the jury never heard from him directly. But his report, which became public later, was pretty pointed. He wrote that the investigation had serious flaws. He wrote that several investigative steps were skipped. He named things he would have done. Pull Higgins' access logs at the Canton PD, get his cell carrier records, look at his iCloud, inspect his vehicle. Easter's view was that an investigator's job is not just to build a case against a suspect. It's also to eliminate other people. He felt that didn't happen here. Now, here's the important context. Easter was a paid defense expert. That doesn't mean he was wrong. Plenty of defense experts are right, but it does mean we should know that. The prosecution had its own experts. They argued the damage to Karen's taillight was consistent with hitting John. They argued there was glass in his clothing. They argued that data from John's phone showed his step count, and movement stopped right when Karen's car was in that area. Two sets of experts, two different stories. The first trial ended in July 2024 with a hung jury, mistrial. Some jurors later came forward and said they had agreed she wasn't guilty of murder, but they were stuck on a lesser charge. The retrial started in April 2025. Different strategy from the prosecution. They didn't even call Higgins or Albert to the stand. The defense did. On June 18, 2025, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury came back. Karen Read was found not guilty of second-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter, not guilty of leaving the scene. She was convicted on one charge, operating under the influence. As a first-time offender, she got 1 year probation. Now, here is where I have to say the thing that nobody who follows this case wants to hear. An acquittal is not the same as a finding of innocence. And not charging someone is not the same as clearing them. The jury did not say Karen didn't do it. They said the prosecution didn't prove she did. That's a legal distinction. Brian Higgins was never charged. He was never named as a suspect by law enforcement. The district attorney has stated publicly that the witnesses, in his view, did not commit any crime. So what really happened to John O'Keefe that night? Honestly, I don't know. The truth is, the people who were inside that house know more than the public will ever know. And the man who could speak for himself, John, can't. What we do have is a case that exposed something bigger than itself. The investigation had real problems. The lead investigator was fired. The town of Canton voted to audit its police department, and the audit found significant issues. That part is just fact. That part is documented. What you choose to do with the rest is up to you. Maybe you think Karen Read got away with it. Maybe you think she was framed. Maybe you think something in between. The honest answer is, this case is messy. The evidence is contested, the witnesses contradict each other, and the people closest to it are not telling the same story. A man died. A family lost someone they loved. 2 children lost their guardian. Whatever you believe about who is responsible, that part doesn't get smaller with time. Before I close out, the disclaimer. This video is for information and analysis purposes. Everyone mentioned is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. The theories discussed are positions argued by various parties. They are not legal conclusions. Do your own research. Read primary sources. Reach your own view. And whatever you decide you believe, hold it loosely. Because the only people who really know what happened on Fairview Road that night were on Fairview Road that night. Thanks for watching. If you've got a perspective I missed, drop it in the comments. I read them, and I'll see you on the next one.